Hi, everybody. Welcome to AI Summit, and thanks for coming to learn a little bit about what's going on in the infrastructure side of the house and data center. My name is Daniel McGinniss. I look after product management for our compute business unit at Cisco. So all things servers pretty much at Cisco. My team is responsible for driving that roadmap and then bringing all the products in that portfolio to market. So what I thought about doing today is as I was putting together a presentation, I was thinking like, all right, what can I leave this audience with to teach them something new coming from a vendor perspective without trying to make it be a vendor pitch? And so what I thought about was, well, let's talk a little bit about maybe what to expect from your vendors and how to work a little bit better with them. Before we jump in, I'm curious, like who's in the audience here? Do I have like traditional IT teams? Maybe raise your hand for me. IT, networking, little bit, okay. I'm on the line of business side, perhaps. Okay. AI practitioner, you have a dedicated AI role at your company? Okay. This half of the room doesn't want to raise their hand. Do you build applications? Are you on the vendor side? You supply applications to other vendors? Okay. Who's my competitors? Yeah, they're not going to raise their hand. There we go. We got one brave one back there. Nice. All right, good. So we'll talk a little bit about just kind of what's happening for the next 20 minutes or so, kind of what from a vendor perspective, what we're kind of seeing in the industry, try to help break some of this down, and then give you hopefully some good guidance on how to like maybe get started as you're dipping your toes in the water on the infrastructure side. All right, so I think we've probably seen enough of these types of slides at the show. If you've been to any events, you're probably seeing, yeah, of course, innovation, it's staggering, right? With the pace that we're seeing AI grow. It's happening so rapidly, we almost don't know what to do with it. So if we're in the business of trying to support this or stand it up inside of our data center or roll it out, it's quite a challenge, right? If you look at just 2 years ago, I mean, it's not like AI is new. We've been using ML for quite some time in pretty much every industry. But then 22, ChatGPT shows up on the scene, and next thing you know, everybody's going crazy over what do we do here? How do we use it? How do we make money? How do we not go broke trying to instantiate it or put it in. And so ultimately what that kind of means is like there's no playbook right now, right? Why is the reason we're here at shows like this? It's like we're trying to figure it out. I can't go just download a book and say, how do I install AI in my environment? There's a lot of new questions. It's actually pretty cool, right? This is the biggest change we've seen in the industry probably in any of our careers. But then we have to figure out how to go navigate it. So I want to just kind of break down just to do some level setting or some context setting here for the audience. The way, when we think about building products, right, thinking about providing you with infrastructure, you got to have some kind of a framework or some kind of a guide on what do we build and why do we build it. And so I kind of put AI into 3 buckets. The first I'll call it is kind of like this build the model bucket, right, training bucket. Most people in this room most likely are not actually building models, unless you're on the application team and you're the ones that are actually building an app or monetizing an app. Most of you will not be building models. This takes big infrastructure, right? These are the huge boxes that we hear, 8-way GPU boxes, and sometimes we're buying these in the hundreds, if not thousands. Optimize the model is really when we start to talk about like Hugging Face right now. Everybody's heard of Hugging Face, I'm assuming, right? There's 1 million models right now in Hugging Face, 1 million. That basically means there's an LLM to do anything you want it to do. But at some point, we've got to use that LLM. We've got to train it with some data that's important to my business or it's important to my use case. And so that's when we start talking about RAG or fine tuning. And then lastly, what good is a model or what good is an application if we actually don't use it or we don't know how to inference it? And that's where the inferencing use case comes in. The reason this is important, it might be obvious to some of you, but to many it's still not, is that these different use cases that I just described, they use drastically different types of infrastructure, drastically different types of requirements on the server, in the network, and all of the infrastructure that surrounds it. And so that also leads into this kind of other dilemma. So I had some of you raise your hands in the beginning. One of the things that we see quite often is there's these kind of new personas that are positioning themselves, almost like cloud was 15 years ago, right? We had these shadow IT organizations that were developing hybrid cloud or private cloud. And so now we have lines of business and AI practitioners that are frankly driving a lot of the early stages of these conversations and what that architecture potentially needs to look like. And that creates a huge burden for those of you that put your hand up that are on the IT teams, because at some point it's going to get thrown over the fence to you, and your job is to put the same SLAs, the same operating model, be able to do moves, adds, and changes, and all the things that you've worked out in your traditional workloads like VMware and VDI and all the other apps that we've been running for decades. Now the same expectations happen for these AI workloads. And so for us, I really try to think about the drastic disparity in the use cases, as well as what it takes from a people and time perspective to support these applications in the environment. And this drives a lot of why we do and what we do inside the portfolio. All right, so why is it so complex? Look, I mean, my analogy here, I'm going to use a car analogy throughout the presentation, but we're kind of building a new car and we're redesigning the road at the same time. And so that means inside the data center, everything is being reconsidered. We're thinking about security. We're thinking about power constraints. We're thinking about how we're going to make these investments and actually have ROI. We're thinking about cooling problems, power density problems, space, the network. I mean, it's a lot. So the good news is you'll all be happily employed and there's tons of job security in it. The hard part is just how do we learn this and how do we embrace it? All right, so what should you look for? Now let's get into where we hopefully give you some things to walk away with that you'll say, I was at Danny's presentation, I learned something. My first recommendation to you is kind of this idea of self-identification. I think it's important that you understand where you are in your journey. If you don't know that, then you're kind of set yourself up for failure about where you're trying to get to. So, I don't know, I kind of broke this down into 4 areas. The first is I'll call it hearing, right? You hear what's going on. You're going to shows like this. It's the buzz. You can't watch the news without hearing about AI at the moment, right? So we kind of got this fear of missing out. Like, what's it all about? I gotta learn more. Maybe that's one of the reasons you're here at a show like this. Then you're exploring. So some of you are starting to dabble a little bit. Maybe you're starting to stand up environments. You're starting to try to figure it out. You don't really know what the use cases are going to be yet. You're starting to look into those. Or maybe you have use cases, but you're trying to figure out what their purpose will be inside of your company or inside of your business. Others of you are deploying. And this is a whole challenge in itself, right? Because when we decide that something's useful, well, now we actually have to go make it work. And we have a whole new set of things that we've never worked with. There is no VMware right now for AI. I mean, that's a whole nother topic, right? VMware. But there's no VMware for AI. This stuff is not simple. There's a whole layer of new applications and software that have to come together. And I'm sure some of you are starting to experience this, if not, are well-versed in it already. And then this last stage is actually using. So now you've got it up and running. You're either starting to save your company some money, you're trying to drive some efficiencies inside the business, you're starting to make some money. Hopefully we can figure out a way to be profitable on this. But I think it's important to identify and ultimately try to figure out a path on how we're going to get to the point where we're actually using. All right. So a little bit more about AI. When we look at this from like a company posture and what's happening around the industry, I think everyone would probably, if you asked, the average person that's somewhat familiar with technology about what are the fundamental makeups of AI, typically 3 things come to mind. I need a model or an app. I need some compute to run that app, and I need data, right? What good is this AI if we don't have any data? There's 2 other really important things. As you start to double click and you start to do more of this and you get invested, there's quickly comes to mind oh crap, I have to secure this, right? That's just as important as it's always been the data center, if not more. And security is in many forms. It's not just securing the actual in and out of the model, like the user traffic to it, but it's also securing the data itself. This is your most proprietary company data that you're potentially hosting somewhere that can make or break the success of your company. And then the 5th piece is networking. The network really, really gets taxed. We have a whole new set of problems. We've been talking about east-west traffic in the data center for decades. This takes east-west traffic to a whole nother level as we start to get into some of these more complex Gen AI applications. So what do you need from a vendor? I think you need 3 things. I think you probably need more than 3, but this is the 3 that I thought were important for today. You need choice. At the end of the day, you're going to find that, one, this is a very dynamic space. And if you go back to that slide I showed earlier where there's a lot of different use cases, even with your own, within your own company, you can almost guarantee that for anybody that works in a decent size company here, there's multiple Gen AI projects, whether or not you know about them or not, there's multiple Gen AI projects being considered inside of your company right now. Some of those are going to take off. Some of those are going to be complete failures. Some of those might be somewhere in the middle. So you need choice. You need infrastructure that's going to give you flexibility and choice. You need solutions. I think now more than ever is not the time to say we're going to buy a bunch of parts and stick them together ourselves. We need to have a solution that's been tested and validated so that you can get up and running immediately. There's an interesting dynamic that has happened with AI. So we were already kind of on this path to cloud right-sizing, right? For those of you that are in an enterprise, a lot of your workloads probably went to public cloud over the last decade. It was a no-brainer, right? Like, yeah, we're just going to move stuff out to the public cloud. Even if it's running a VM, we'll just run it out there. And then for the last few years, we've been kind of on this repatriation kick, right? Where we've been starting to bring stuff back, kind of like a right-sizing. Because the economics didn't work out, the performance, the security, there were multiple reasons of why that occurred. Well, AI is now accelerating that whole move, right? Nobody wants to put their proprietary company data inside of a public cloud. Very few people. I should have asked who are my public cloud providers here. A lot of times we start there, but ultimately the CISO gets involved and whomever else, and they start saying, well, no, we can't have that. We need to run it locally. So you need solutions to get you up and running because you don't have all that cloud convenience that you once had. And then lastly, you need simple, right? You need simple to order, you need simple to operate. So let's break these down a little bit. Flexibility in your solution. So my recommendation to you is look for choice. You know, when you go to buy a car, kind of like the car analogy. And by the way, you know, all these images are Gen AI originated. There's nothing, all this stuff was generated through AI. They're not stock photography. That's like a big change we're seeing in the industry, right? So when we go to buy a car, like, yeah, it's nice to have a little bit of a choice, but you know, you want to be able to pick your engine size, your tires, whatever it may be. But like you need that choice because every application that you're going to build is going to have a different set of requirements. And so a little bit about like what we do here. When I think about my portfolio at Cisco, it's really about trying to build a portfolio that accommodates the whole spectrum of AI applications that I was alluding to when we think about that, building the model and training the model and meeting the largest, most intense boxes that we have, as well as the networking, down to the lowest and edge inferencing use case that doesn't even require a GPU to run. And so across networking, across silicon, across our UCS, which is our server lineup, security, as well as all the software to align with it, this is really, to me, and this is almost table stakes at this point, I think, if you're going to be a vendor playing in this space. Okay, solutions. So now let's put the car together, right? You show up, you didn't want to buy an engine, you didn't want to buy tires, you wanted to buy a car. And so for us, we spend probably almost just as much, if not more time, focusing on solution or validated designs than we do actually just building the products themselves. We think that, or we know from the feedback we get from our customers that, you know, more than ever, you don't want to have to waste your time doing all that testing. Like, that's what's so beautiful about a public cloud model, right? When you go to the cloud, you know that infrastructure stack is there for you. It's tested. It just works. You don't have to worry about the driver that goes onto the server and the firmware that goes onto the switch. You have a network that provides you infrastructure ready to go. And so we focus a lot on that as well. And we do this with our partners. Like, the data center, it's a big space. There's a lot of players in the space. My job is not to try to be everything to everyone. It's also about knowing who are your best of breed vendors and making sure that we have good business partnerships with them, good technical integrations with them, and even more importantly, an end-to-end support model for these. And so one of the things we spend a lot of time on is this concept of a validated design. So now, you know, think about us taking the tires and the engine and the transmission, putting that in the car, but now testing that entire car for you. And that's both on products that we manufacture, as well as some of the best of breed partners that I just mentioned. And so with the concept of a validated design, our engineers sit in our labs, not only configure this, but they also test it at scale for performance with the applications that you run in your data centers. And so now to you, rather than having to figure out how to get a switch to talk to a server, to get to talk to to a hypervisor, to get to talk to a containers platform, that's done for you. And so is the automation and the tool sets that allow you to just basically turn it on in your environment and start building your applications on top. And then the last thing we need is simple, right? A big focus for us is how do you make sure that you can order these things, get started quickly. The thing that we're finding more and more is that because it's so new, like I said earlier, there's no playbook right now. So what we're seeing more and more is like customers like, where do I start? Especially traditional IT teams. Quite often, like I mentioned, those Gen AI conversations are happening inside of your company. But if you're in IT, you may not be involved in those conversations. They may be happening without you. And so that's terrible, right? Because now somebody's going to mandate an architecture that they've already tested based on something you may not agree with or you may not find to be the right architecture that goes into your environment. And so we're trying to create that concept of, okay, how do we make sure that you have a starting place for when you do have these very nascent projects that you're starting to work on? So we took everything we did with building the portfolio, everything we did with the CVDs, and bundled that all up into what we call an AI pod. And the idea being here is that when we don't know how to get started, let's actually make sure that there's an entire stack that includes not just the Cisco components like the switching and the networking. Let's bring in the storage pieces from partners like Pure and NetApp and others. But let's also bring in the Red Hat piece so that now you have your containers platform up and running. And let's bring in the software stack from NVIDIA with NVAIE. And so now what do you get from an AI pod? You literally have a single SKU with sizing information that shows you, hey, I'm going to run a 7 billion parameter llama model in my environment to do edge inferencing on. What do I need? Well, I have an AI pod for that. The other thing we tried to do with the concept of AI pods, and again, in the spirit of thinking about how you work and how you look to your vendors for consultation, is what we've seen happen a lot of in the industry, especially in the last 9, 12 months, is there's kind of like that fear of missing out that I mentioned of like, oh man, I don't know what I don't know. I know it's coming, so I got to go buy some GPU boxes. And these boxes get pretty expensive pretty quick. And so there are blank checks. You probably have seen some of this happen from your own company. There are blank checks being written all the time. I see it every day, where we don't know what we're going to run, but we need 1,000 GPUs. We don't know what we're going to run, and we need 500 GPUs. And like, yeah, that's really exciting for, especially for a salesperson if you're at Cisco. But at the end of the day, that's not really how we would win your loyalty, right? My goal is to have my teams be able to work with you to help you properly size an environment. Start to look at the questions that you may have to ask. I'm going to have this many concurrent users. I have a model that's this large that runs. If I'm going to train a model, I'm okay if it takes a month instead of a week. And as you start to pull that information together, now you can get more dialed in on exactly what you need and start to spend your money wisely and make it go further. So for example, on some of these inferencing pods, that first one that you see there, the one mostly to the left, that doesn't even have a GPU in it. And the biggest takeaway for me and a lot of what I've learned in the course of the past couple of years doing what I do is that like not everything needs a GPU. Let's see if we can do it on a CPU. And let's make sure that we have a path to grow as my application increases in both size and scale. The next thing that we're complementing this with is a set of what we call AI advisors. So think of an advisory tool. So yeah, okay, so this concept of AI pods, right? It's good. You got a small, a medium, and large. That'll get you so far. You're going to get smarter. You're going to learn more about your environment. You're going to start to roll out a couple of these applications. You're going to be like, well, wait a second. Like that small, medium, large thing isn't really right for me. So, and this is not easy to do, by the way. This is really complex stuff. But now you should be looking for, we've had sizers for years, right? We know how to size a VDI environment. We know how to size a virtualization environment. It doesn't exist yet for AI environments. It's kind of it's a little bit of a wild, wild west and a guessing game. I mean, people are doing stuff in Excel spreadsheets, but it's a really complex math problem, right? I think about like what capabilities I have in a CPU, what capabilities I have in a GPU, how much memory I have, how much storage I have, all that kind of and dozens of other things. And all of that sort of comes together to determine how large of an infrastructure stack you require. And so now you should be looking for these from your vendors. Don't settle for like, yeah, I just want to go buy the largest box you have and that should be fine. We should be able to dial this in based on the application profile that you want to run in your environment. All right, so kind of wrapping it up here. Maybe there's no playbook for AI, but there certainly is a path forward. And I think when we think about this kind of what phase are you in? Are you in that hearing phase? Are you in the exploring phase? Are you in the deploying phase? Are you in the using phase? Start to cross-reference that with these things, right? Start to think about choice. Start to think about reliability. Start to think about simplicity and what questions you're going to want to ask. So if you think about choice, like what are my choices for infrastructure? Yes, you might have something that I need today, but as my needs change, do you have a portfolio that's going to grow with me? How do you look at the network, the compute, the security? It's not just about buying a server with a bunch of GPUs in it. It's about how do all these things actually connect and work together. It's fundamental to thinking about how we will support these environments at scale. When we think about reliability, think about it from have it been validated? Like how much work has your vendor done for you? Don't settle for buying an engine, a transmission, and a tire. Buy a car. Buy a car that has choice, but buy something that's been tested and validated so that you're not using up your precious time trying to get to that starting point. Let us do that. And then lastly, I'd say from a simplicity standpoint, how is this going to be managed and operating? One of the things that we really focus on when I think about like how I want to design the portfolio across everything, right, across the whole data center, my theory, and this is something my whole team and I talk about, is that your traditional workloads that you're running in your data centers today should not really look, act, or feel much different from your AI applications. It should just be another workload, specifically when we're talking about the infrastructure. So my goal is to make sure that you have an operating model that is identical. Whether or not it's your traditional apps or your new apps, you shouldn't have to handle the way that you do moves, adds, and changes. You shouldn't have to change the way that you instantiate the infrastructure. You shouldn't have to change the way you troubleshoot. A lot of, especially in other stacks, right? Some of these tools, they take decades to build. You don't just build an operations or a management platform in a year or two and expect it to do everything you need to do. There's a lot of actually AI embedded in these tools so that we can operate at scale and remove a lot of that mundane work from you, so that you can focus again on the things that are more valuable to your firm. All right, and so with that, I hope it gives you a little bit of guidance and gives you some tough questions to start to talk to your teams about or talk to your vendors about. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the show. All right.